Rada Osman. I'm a faculty member of the Center for Islamic and Arabic Studies. I'm here today on behalf of our director, Professor Hisham Fouad, director of the Center for Islamic and Arabic Studies, who couldn't be here today, so it's my pleasure to welcome you all here on his behalf. We have today a very exciting panel, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the presentations of all three of our speakers. The topic is the Muslim American vote and the November election. And we have three speakers today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce all three speakers now, and in the order in which they will speak. Please let me know right now as I'm speaking, is the volume of my voice okay? All right, great. So I'll continue to yell now. Our three speakers will continue to yell during their presentation, and we'll make the best of things in that manner. It's a little disconcerting to be in a room that's the only standing room of a building that's been completely demolished. So, we'll keep that in mind as we continue and hope that that doesn't have any sort of symbolism on the topic that's being presented today. So our first speaker for this evening will be Edina Lekovich. She is from the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and as the Director of Policy and Programming from the Muslim Public Affairs Council, she oversees strategic initiatives in government, media, and Hollywood engagement, as well as its leadership development programs. From 2004 to 2010, she served as Impact, the Muslim Public Affairs Council's Communication Director, and has appeared on numerous national media outlets, including CNN, BBC, MSNBC, the History Channel, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, Associated Press, and the LA Times, and I'm sure there's more. She's also the co-founder and chair of New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change, and Elevate, an arts-based youth leadership development program. She has an MA in communication from Pepperdine University and a BA in American literature and culture from UCLA. Our second speaker, all the way to your right, is Edgar Hopida, who from the Council on American Islamic Relations. He's an American-born Filipino who converted to Islam in 1998. He has appeared on local and national media programs and has regularly written for a number of local newspapers on American Islamic issues. He's currently a senior consultant for the San Diego chapter of the Council on Islamic American Relations, also known as CARE. He's a founding member of the Logan Islamic Community Center and is currently serving as the board secretary, a founding member of the United for a Hate-Free San Diego from 2007 to 2009, member of the County of San Diego District Attorney's Interfaith Advisory Board, member of the San Diego Regional Hate Crimes Coalition from 2010 to 2012, and a Columbia University Next Generation Project Fellow for the West Coast Assembly, focusing on U.S. global policy and the future of international institutions. He holds a degree in sociology from San Diego State University, so he's an alum of SDSU. And his religious education includes a decade-long studying of several classical Islamic texts covering Islamic law, Islamic legal theory, theology, Sufism, Islamic mysticism, hadith, i.e. prophetic traditions, and the biography of the Prophet Muhammad with several Muslim scholars and specialists. And last but by no means least in the center is Ahmed Younis. Ahmed Younis is an American public intellectual, social entrepreneur, and orator. In the fall of 2012, he departed a successful career in public policy and survey research to embark upon the founding of Postdoc. He served as senior consultant with Gallup and a senior analyst for the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies from 2008 to 2012. He is co-author of American Blackness, Negotiating Change and Free Black Wealth, and is also the author of American Muslims Voir Dire, Speak the Truth, a post-September 11th look at the reality of debate surrounding American Muslims in their country. In 2009, 2010, and 2011, he was named as one of the 500 most influential Muslims globally by the Royal Islamic Strategic Center in Jordan. And in 2011 and 2012, Arabian Business Magazine named him as one of the Power 500 of the Arab world and one of the 500 most famous Arabs in the world. In 2006, and these are just a few highlights that I'm presenting out of everybody's bios, in 2006, Ahmed joined Ambassador Dennis Ross at the convening of Search for Common Ground to begin a national conversation on a long-term strategy to improve U.S. relations with the Muslim world. He is a graduate of Washington and Lee University School of Law. So please join me in welcoming all three of our panels.
Everybody. It's my pleasure to be here. Not only did I grow up in San Diego, but I'm really thrilled because my parents and my husband and the screaming baby in the back are all here as well. It's not often that I get the opportunity to come home, and as my parents will attest to, and it's also not often that I get to have the opportunity to have my professional and personal lives intersect in this way. The topic tonight is one that I actually hesitated to say yes to because when Dr. Osman asked, because to me, even a few weeks ago, the situation with the elections is so fluid and is changing on a day-to-day basis that that the thought even 2 weeks ago was, well, who knows what's even going to be happening in 2 weeks, to be able to have a conversation about this, but. As the kickoff speaker, what I'd like to do is set up this election 2012 in the context of Muslim sort of American Muslim historical participation. I'm somebody who grew up here in San Diego. My parents are from the former Yugoslavia and grew up under a communist, socialist, sort of a hybrid system. My parents came to this country and brought me and my sister here to San Diego precisely so that we would have the right to vote, precisely so that we would have a right to education, precisely so that we would have freedom of religion accessed and available to us in a way that we wouldn't have gotten had we grown up where my ancestors are from. For that reason, the issue of voting, the issue of civic participation, for me as an American Muslim, is core to my identity. It comes from no other place than straight from the heart of my faith in order to be civically engaged, in order to be a full-fledged, active member of not just my Muslim community, but my American community. I live in Pasadena, in Los Angeles now, in my Pasadena community. It is my responsibility as a Muslim grounded in my faith to care for my neighbors and to enjoin good, forbid bad, and do good in this world that serves all people. For all of those reasons, the challenge in the season of elections is one that, for many American Muslims, brings them back to their own questions of identity over and over and over again. Now, this may feel, a little irrelevant now looking in 2012, but this election season is one that has been very different from the past few that we have been through. While 2/3 of the American Muslim community are immigrant by origin, 1/3 of this community is African American, Latino, and other indigenous populations. For many of those who are coming from immigrant backgrounds, this is in many ways the first time that there is an experience of voting. And it may be a surprise to you, but frankly, given where the American Muslim community was nearly 15 years ago, simply the question of whether we should vote was a hotly debated topic. It was so hotly debated that there were debates that would happen within communities about whether it is halal or haram, whether it is encouraged or forbidden, permissible or forbidden to vote. If this system is not, quote, Islamic, then why should we engage in it? And aren't we condoning any negative things that we see, and negative track records that we see within candidates? And that reality, that challenge, and that internal debate that stifled the community for the American Muslim community for so long, for the good or bad of it, was in many ways sort of obliterated with the sick reality of the 9/11 terror attacks. Because for many Muslims, for the first time, this question of am I American, am I Muslim, can I be both, was erased instantaneously. Because when you're being told to go back home, and you don't know, home is Carmel Valley, like where I grew up here in San Diego. It's not overseas. Those questions of identity quickly become erased. And that sense of personal ownership that a large number of American Muslims have cultivated in the last 15 years has become more and more hyped. Now, the difference in my mind between 2012 and 2008 is what I'd like to focus on in the little time I have for opening remarks. Because what I would like to argue that here in 2012, what we're facing in this election is, frankly, today, on this date, October 18th, is a cakewalk compared to where American Muslims were 4 years ago. If I could take you back with me, let me read you a short quote from an Associated Press article that was printed almost 4 years ago to the date. It was printed October 23rd by the Associated Press, and the headline of the article, I think, says most of it. U.S. Muslim voters are election year outcasts. And the first paragraph of this article started with, lepers, untouchables, politically radioactive. These are the ways Muslim Americans describe their status in an election year when Barack Obama's opponents are spreading rumors that he's Muslim and linking him to terrorists, ... In reading that quote, I hope that the sentiment of 4 years ago, the national sentiment, the national conversation where religion became central and became a political tool that was, and a political football that was thrown around to try to discredit Barack Obama specifically, came front and center. And for many Muslims, 4 years ago, Islam was front and center, but American Muslims were galvanized by the prospect of change and by the prospect of Obama's campaign, the first president of color, and far many other factors, but more so than anything else, this idea of the hope of change and looking to be a part of that change. And this was despite the fact that there were all these dirty slurs that were going on, from Obama's a Muslim, which apparently a full 1/5, 20% of the American public still believes today. A woman who covers her hair, a hijabi, who was removed from a campaign platform, a Muslim advisor being dismissed from the campaign, and my personal favorite, or probably the low in the cesspool, was that there were 28 million American homes received an anti-Muslim propaganda DVD in their newspapers that were delivered on their front steps. And it's no coincidence that they were delivered in 11 swing states just 2 or 3 weeks before the election took place. And that this same DVD called Obsession was also mailed to hundreds of churches and synagogues all around the country. The climate was different. It was in many ways toxic, and yet that did not prevent American Muslims from being involved. In fact, more American Muslims went to the polls than ever before. Now, to get right to it, today in 2012, and I am eager to hear what my colleagues have to say, but today here in 2012, my experience with the American Muslim community and traveling around the country and in working on an election campaign, I brought copies of our election campaign toolkit. Our campaign this year is focusing on my faith, my vote, my future. The central challenge of the American Muslim voter today, I believe, is apathy. Much like other Americans. What we're seeing in American voters at large is a sense of a combination of apathy and disillusionment. That apathy is rooted in feeling disappointed by the last 4 years. And this is, in talking to American Muslims again in many different communities, there's a list of complaints that's out there. And then they find themselves often in this position of, well, okay, maybe I just sit this one out. And so for somebody like me, as a professional activist in many ways, working to empower and to mobilize my community to get out there, not just vote, but also to work actively in campaigns. And beyond the election year, to work in school boards and PTAs and public finance commissions and getting involved on a local level. The biggest challenge is this challenge of how to break through that wall. How to get people to care who don't feel that their interests have been represented or not enough progress has taken place. Now, doesn't that sound strikingly familiar to what we're hearing from the general population? And that's frankly, I think, what the story is of the American Muslim voter today. They're grappling with a lot of the same issues. Now, interestingly, I just have a minute or two left, or a few minutes, but interestingly, one of the ways that we started the Muslim Public Affairs Council as an organization was simply through this idea of seeing that there was no American Muslim public voice in public affairs and public life. That the nerve centers of our country who determine public policy and public opinion, that they were not seeing Muslims within their ranks and that there weren't Muslims at their tables. And so that became the galvanizing point, the point of inspiration for a group like MPAC to begin. We work directly with government, media, and Hollywood, the nerve centers, that not only not only send out messages to Americans, but to the world at large. And it's for those reasons that this year, when we looked at how we would approach the election, we simply weren't sure what was first and foremost or center in the minds of the average American Muslim voter today. The issue seemed a lot clearer about 4 years ago. And so we went about doing an online survey of American Muslim voters. Now, this is an academic environment, and this was not an academic study. It was merely an online poll, so there's my disclaimer. But in a poll of over 500 American Muslim voters around the country online, admittedly most of them probably are members, but distributed over Facebook and so other social media channels, so probably also tilted a little bit to the younger side. We were surprised by what we found. We were surprised by what we found were the top 3 issues that would determine the American Muslim vote, according to the people who took our poll. Any guesses what those top 3 issues might be? This is where it gets interactive. Foreign policy. Sorry? The economy. Any other guesses?
Religious freedom.
Religious freedom. You're all wrong. Those are the things that we thought too. When the results came back to us, the most important issue at the top of the list, among all the issues we listed, the most important issue was that of immigration. Number 1 on the list was immigration. Number 2 on the list, even more surprising to me, was the environment. This may have something to do also with the fact that that our polling audience was probably skewed younger because we were online and on social media. But it also speaks to me because when one of the things that we do as an organization, and that frankly drives my activism in many ways, is that we work to invest in young American Muslims, to get them involved in these industries, to get them involved in these nerve centers, rather than just sitting on the sidelines. And 3 years ago, we brought 20 young college students, the best and the brightest from around the country, to meet with all kinds of senior leadership in Washington, D.C. One of our meetings was with the Congressman Frank Wolf, who is a Republican from the state of Virginia, and probably skewed far more to the right than most of our young American Muslims in our delegation. The most heated debate that they got into was about the environment. And it surprised me then 3 years ago, and the fact that the environment came up second in terms of the priorities that we are seeing this year similarly surprised me, but again with the younger generation, we're seeing these themes that also connect to the broader American public. Third on the list was taxes in the federal budget. So kind of, the economy sort of. Yeah, exactly, you get half a point. Taxes in the federal budget. 4th was national security, and 5th was foreign aid. Not even foreign policy, but foreign aid specifically. And and if you want to see the rest of the list, you can just go to mpac.org, and they're all there. And I have brought a few extra copies so you can get a taste of those also. But I think that this represents what is sort of a shifting landscape within the American Muslim voting public. The priorities are shifting, and so is notions of identity and how these things matter. Now, I'll let my colleagues get into the nitty-gritty beyond this. But I want to leave you with what I'm currently watching as the next chapter of this election campaign season, to see how it will turn out. What I have my eyes on is particularly a very pro-right-wing agenda that's out there that seems to have taken its inspiration from what was happening in 2008. People like Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, Steve Emerson, these known Islamophobes, who are frankly, they're anti-Muslim bigots. You can choose your own terminology. But Congresswoman Bachmann just this spring called for, I don't know how many of you heard this, called for an investigation into any Muslims who might be working for our federal government, intending to launch a sort of witch hunt, if you will. Luckily, even the Republican leadership didn't take the bait. From the likes of Senator McCain, who stood up and called this un-American and condemned it, and even the Republican Party, which has not done enough to condemn its own right wing. But on the heels of that Bachman call for a witch hunt, what we're seeing now this fall in New York, and coming off the heels of San Francisco, but now in New York and in Washington, D.C., is these insidious ad campaigns that are taking place on public transportation. Have any of you heard about this in the New York public, in the subway system? Pamela Geller, the same woman who was behind the Ground Zero Mosque brouhaha, to put it politely, is behind these ads that are they're racist, they're bigoted, and they're divisive, and frankly, they're un-American. And they at their center is the word savages, and is essentially equating Muslims or anybody who's pro-Palestinian in a stretch as being savages. These ads have now spread to Washington, D.C. And this sort of reminds me of how, this obsession campaign that was out there a few years ago, where there's this intent to sort of spread fear and use fear in these last weeks of the election. But what leaves me hopeful is also something that happened recently, which, I don't know about you, but how many of you heard the news today that Newsweek is folding as a print publication? Good news to me, only because recently they ran a cover story that was called Muslim Rage. Front and center, Muslim Rage. And the beautiful thing that happened, I think, that represents where the American Muslim community, particularly the younger elements within our community, they took up this hashtag campaign about Muslim Rage that ended up being all the rage, and that ended up trending on Twitter, where they would make fun of the Muslim Rage angle that was out there, and instead ridiculing it by things like, the one that I thought was funny was, as somebody who covers my hair, is, I'm having a great hair day and nobody can tell, Muslim Rage. And I think that speaks to what's unique about not only the American Muslim experience, but the American experience, is that even in these times of great challenge, there are still moments of hope. But what I, in the next few weeks, if we were to have this conversation in a month, what I'm the most interested in seeing is how many American Muslim voters turn up to the polls, and also what the net effect is, regardless of what happens. So I will stop there and turn it over to my colleagues. Thank you.
I'd like to first thank, can everybody hear me? Especially people in the back, okay. First I'd like to thank Professor Ahmed and the Center for Arabic and Islamic Studies for inviting me and the rest of my colleagues to this very important discussion, especially in just a couple of weeks before the elections, which is the American Muslim community and what's going to go on in the 2012 elections. What I'm going to be covering is a little bit more broad in scope. It's going to be talking about the civic engagement of the American Muslims in the last decade, some positive trends or steps forward, so to speak, and some of the challenges that I feel is still inhibiting the Muslim community in civic engagement. So of course, the cliche is we want to hear the good news first, right? Actually, some people say the bad news first, but in this case, we're going to be the good news first. So, since the 9/11 tragedy, there has been, according to the polling data, and I'm not a pollster, I'm going to leave for Ahmed to go over that, the polling stuff. But from the polling data that we've seen, there has been a resurgence of active political participation with the American Muslim community. Little bit of upticks from the registered voters, people going out to vote, and even the advocacy organizations like MPAC and CARE and various others doing voter registration drives, voter guides, forums. So there has been an educational and active participation of the Muslim community since 9/11. They realized that things are not going to get any better until you start dealing with the problem, so that's what they did, was starting to address some of those issues very slowly. This voice has to be heard and looked at. And so that's some of the issues. And of course, I have another point, which is, another thing is that the Muslim community, by and large, has little strategic understanding on how to develop political capital within the Muslim community in America. That we're still trying to figure a way to kind of harness that. And the Jewish American community has been wonderful in doing that. And that's why they're a force to be reckoned with. And it's not some anti-Semitic story. It's an institutional analysis. The Jewish American community has been very successful because they were able to mobilize under a common denominator. And I think Muslims are still trying to figure that out. And I look forward to the discussion and the exchanges. And now we're going to have the cleanup hitter come up and then give us some more stuff. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I had a binder full of women in the car, but it was too heavy to drag all the way here from the garage. I'm trouble from my Muslim host now. I'd actually like to begin with the sociology of American Muslims leading up to this point. We've heard a number of points that relate to it, but maybe just a bit more of a concrete assessment of who are the Muslims of America. First, what is their sociocultural disposition on the issues that we deal with on a regular basis? And third, if I have time, what are kind of my hopes for the future? So let's begin by ensuring that we're all talking about the same group of people. There are about 6 to 8 million Muslims in America. Approximately 35 to 38% of them are Black American. As Sherman Jackson writes in his book, The Third Resurrection, this is a group that's referred to as Black American, one word, no spaces, as opposed to African American or any other title that you would offer. 22% of them are of Arab origin, and about 25 to 28% of them are of South Asian origin, and everybody else is kind of from anywhere, Filipinos, white people, all kinds of Muslims. So I'm not hiding the ball, I come from an Arab family. I think a couple of things that are very important to understand. Less than 30% of the Muslims in America attend a mosque once a week. That means you're most likely to meet a Muslim not at a mosque, but at a bar, at the car dealership, at the supermarket, at your doctor's office. You're most likely to meet an American Muslim in spaces that are not specific to Islam and Muslims, because the vast majority of them do not frequent places that are specific to Islam and Muslims. So the first conclusion is the demographics of the Muslim American community determine their disposition, not their faith. So when an American Muslim has a perception on policy, whether it's the racism of the local police department, their ability to get a job, the healthcare system, their perception of what's happening in their local community in terms of the quality of the environment, the quality of schools, whether their children have an equal opportunity to succeed or not. Most of the answers to those questions are based on the ethno-demographic reality that person is living, not their faith orientation. So the South Asian Muslims are, for the most part, living like rich white people. They have higher levels of education, they have higher levels of financial attainment, they have higher levels of well-being in their health, they have higher levels of reported environmental well-being, etc. Most Black American Muslims report living similarly to Black non-Muslims that live in their communities. Okay? So it is their ethnic demography that determines most of their perceptions on what's happening in America as opposed to their faith. That leads me to the second point, which is the trajectory of political engagement and the growth of American Muslim paradigmatic orientations as it relates to political engagement. In much of the 60s and 70s, the American Muslim narrative was an immigrant narrative. It was the narrative of people who were here for graduate educations and began to build Muslim spaces for themselves and for their young blossoming communities. At that time, there was a significant presence of what we are now referring to as Black American Muslims, most of whom originate from a slave experience or a convert experience historically. Not necessarily converting from a religion that is not Islam to Islam, but many times converting from an orientation of identity that is most linked with the nation of Islam prior to the leadership of Warith ad-Din Muhammad, the son of Elijah Muhammad. By the late 90s, most of the folks that were running major Muslim American organizations that had the spotlight and that were engaging in the public square were immigrants. And I'm the student of some of those immigrants, and I was very much a part as a young activist.
A very nuanced view of the issue. And I'd like to open it up now to question and answers, and I'm going to take the prerogative and ask the first question. So, it seems to me that in many ways all three of you really talked about growing pains and coming of age of a community. And in some ways too, it seems like when we're talking about the American Muslim community, talking about nuances and complexities, but we're also really talking about, in some ways, two American Muslim communities in some ways, in meaning that on the one hand, we're talking about the mosque goers, the people that we poll, the people that we focus on when we talk about the American Muslim agenda, the people who we assume will vote based on certain religious lines, whatever that exactly means, and then other Muslims who are not mosque goers, who are part of the 70% who are not mosque goers, who are mainly voting on a series of other issues that are important based on a series of other concerns. And I guess I'm wondering within all of this where you see the future. You all talked about this to some extent, but is an American Muslim identity ultimately going to boil down to the fact that Muslim Americans are a minority and therefore, just as other minorities, we assume that they will vote in particular ways? Are we going to look at the Muslim American vote, for example, and say, if you're a Muslim American, you tend to vote X, Y, and Z in the way that a Jewish American tends to vote? For example, we can make assumptions about the Jewish American vote. A typical Jewish American voter is a Democrat, etc., regardless of whether that person is religious or not. These are kind of the general ideas that we have. Or do we see developments in other ways? So Ahmed, you talked about identifying key issues, and Edina, you talked about polling and discovering that key issues aren't the ones that you would necessarily assume. And I guess I'm wondering within all of this how we tease all of that out. I mean, do we see the Muslim American vote gelling in a particular direction as time goes on that is based on faith and also based on mainstream concerns? Or do we see it as just going in the direction of more typical minority community votes? And alongside that, therefore, relatively predictable points of view in terms of immigration, in terms of abortion, gay marriage, foreign policy, etc.
From here, yeah?
For all of you.
Well, let me just say very quickly, I was a Republican for most of my career in Washington, D.C. I was appointed by George W. Bush, and the highest ranking Muslim in Washington, as was referred, is Suhail Khan, who's a member of the Conservative Political Action Committee, CPAC. The reason he is a member of CPAC's board is because of a man named Grover Norquist, who is a non-Muslim leader of Americans for Tax Reform, one of the formidable right-of-center activists, at least as it relates to financial conservatism in Washington. And it's Grover Norquist that fought Frank Gaffney and fought Robert Spencer and fought Jihad Watch and fought all of the kind of hate campaign machine against American Muslims to ensure that Suhail Khan had a role. I am somebody that believes very strongly that as soon as the Republican Party divests itself of racism, the American Muslim community will come right back as it was there previously. And that is because of economics. Many American Muslims are rich. They want the same tax breaks that everybody else does. Their economic realities relegate them logically to a financially conservative, if not socially conservative perspective. But the abhorrent distaste of what is coming from the right of center of American politics today renders in this election most people supporting President Obama, and President Obama's uniqueness of identity rendered them, for the most part, in support of President Obama. But if we look to some of the litmus test issues for American Muslims, which I don't believe should be, on the Palestinian question, there is absolutely no distinction between the Republican and Democratic parties. There's a distinction between President Obama and his relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu and other presidents in their relationship, but there really is no significant distinction. And there are a number of foreign policy and domestic policy issues where there isn't. Now, I am somebody that happens to believe that the other issues are important enough for me to support Barack Obama, even though I was once a Republican appointed by George W. Bush. So that's just to say I do not believe that American Muslims will become another minority vote that can be taken advantage of. At the same time, and you know, I say this more to kind of like, you know, for my own people. You know, unless we can figure out how to run our mosques, we're not going to figure out how to be functioning in the public square. So,
I'll piggyback on that. I 99.9% agree. I think that the bind that we're caught in, and that we've seen more and more of in the course of the last decade or 2 decades, has been this of the mosqued, of the mosques within the American Muslim population. You have this bind of being socially conservative, politically liberal, and that for many people that tension, that internal tension, is part of what causes them to wonder whether and how they should vote, and that, as you said, are there two communities? I would say two would be nice. I think we have. I always cringe when people say the community or the Muslim community, because there's no such thing. There are communities. There's a San Diego, there's a San Diego community that's rich and diverse. There's a Los Angeles community that's rich and diverse. There's a Cairo community that is rich and diverse, and none of these really look the same. And that's part of what has to be taken into consideration here, because you can cut up the pie any way you want, but it looks different every time you cut it. Whether it's mosque or unmosque, immigrant, indigenous, whether you look at male, female. I mean, there are all of these internal fissures that are there that have to be explored. And then I think that what's crucial, I think that there will be a more diverse Muslim voting population that exists as time goes on. Because frankly, where I have hope on the question of anti-Muslim bigotry today is that it's inevitable that its days are numbered. That's the way I always look at it. The history of my country tells me its days are numbered, and my job is to accelerate that progress, is to reduce the distance between now and then. And that I think that one of the ways that one of the things that truly has to happen, and I want to underscore that Ahmed said, is that the Republican Party has to police its own extremists in order for the party to be once again appealing to an American Muslim voting population, which frankly feels that they are on the losing end of most of the statements that are coming out of Republican candidates, obviously particularly from the Tea Party elements more so than anywhere else.
I agree partially with what Ahmed said about, once all the barriers from the Republican Party are over, you'll see, what I would say is the more affluent Muslims will be shifting back to the Republican Party. Whereas a lot of the indigenous Muslims, which come from lower income, lower education, I see a shift even within the Democratic Party where just a very small percentage, just according to poll numbers, are going to third parties. That's why there's going to be an event on Friday from a mosque in Orange County where Ahmed's going to debate against people that are for the third party voting rather than amongst the two established parties.
I don't even know what it's called.
I have no idea.
What's the third party called?
I don't know. But the thing is, they've been especially a lot of the indigenous Muslims and a lot of the Muslims that I guess the very young ones, the very idealistic Muslims, see a disconnect between the two political parties, and so you see them moving toward a third party. And of course, historically, third parties have never won elections. So is there a pragmatic issue to it or pragmatic solution? I don't see the third party being the solution at this time. But it's a discussion to be made. I hope they videotape that debate. But that's what I see developing. But I don't see the Republicans divesting themselves from that hate anytime soon, because a lot of them are very rich, wealthy funders that are producing this Islamophobic, anti-Muslim mess. And they're basically pushing away against money if they're going to be doing that.
Questions, comments from the audience? Yes.
Just a question about how.
Could you speak up a little
Okay,
bit?
sure. Just a question about how you're mentioning the Republican Party has not done enough to distance itself from the far-right elements or Islamophobic elements. Now, or that the American or the Muslim Americanism is somewhat shifting more to the left. Is there a danger, though, that certain elements of the left that could people, I'm just mentioning very, very far left, who have issued bold stances of anti-religion, could in some way pose a threat to the rights of American Muslims, just like they would for American Christians, American Jews, Baha'is.
Could people in the back hear the question?
No.
No, right.
Okay.
So the question basically, to sum it up, was that the panelists mentioned that the Republicans have not done enough really to distance themselves from more extreme elements within the party. But is there a danger with the Muslim American community moving more to the left and therefore now facing extreme left politicians who are anti-religion? Doesn't that pose a risk to the American Muslim community as well?
I'll start on that one. I was just saying to Ahmed, I voted for Nader in 2000. I was among those who felt like the third party candidate was the best option to go with. And I think that there's a lot of my trajectory has since shifted into voting for the mainstream parties, because it feels to me that voting for these days voting for the third party means voting for Romney, and that I'm not comfortable with personally. I think that the challenge faced by the communities from the left extreme is frankly just as threatening, if you want to call it that, as the right extreme, the extreme right, because both carry with them their own challenges. But frankly, I'm okay with the idea of the extremists sort of duking it out, because that's sort of rich dialogue, debate, and hashing it out is what's crucial for the progress of this community in terms of being able to develop rich and diverse identities, rather than saying, well, as a Muslim, who are the Muslims voting for? Who should I vote for? And to develop more of that independent mind, that critical thinking that that causes them to make the best decisions for their own lives.
And I think part of it, I'm trying to be so nice right now. You have no idea. There's an Islamic literacy requisite to engagement as a mature person, and there is an American literacy requisite to engagement as a mature person. So in American politics, pragmatism stumps principle, and maturity is required, and vision is required in order for one to engage pragmatically to help their community win. Now, in order for you to be able to get everyone else to swallow that, you have to have enough Islamic literacy to argue that that pragmatism is necessarily Islamic. So when I go in a debate with somebody that's talking to me about drones, right? At the end of the day, Islamically, I mean, politically, it's very clear to me. I mean, drones is not something that is sufficient for me to not support Barack Obama on, politically. But Islamically, if I were to begin to count the number of people that are suffering from injustice by drones and by Guantanamo Bay, and I would count the number of people that are suffering injustice, they don't have health care, because they don't have education, because the CIA is now going to be run by somebody that's listening to John Bolton on the other side, because people have bumper stickers that say, don't renege. Don't renege. What does that mean? Don't vote for that nigger again. Don't renege. And it's got the Obama sign right next to it. That's the America that we're living in now. And so for the American Muslim community, for me, it's not topical. It's about their level of Islamic literacy and their level of American literacy. And your level to develop, and your ability to develop a maturity as a community, to have the confidence in your Islamic identity, to make the pragmatic decisions that are required in your Americanness in order for there to be more mercy in the world, in order for there to be more justice for more people, in order for there to be more achievement and attainment for a larger group of people. So to me, that's what the challenge is. It's about the growth trajectory of the community on both of those paths. Not so much about, if they start rolling with the liberals, then they're going to have to support gay marriage. I mean, these are things that every American community deals with. And we have these fights all of the time. I mean, I'm very well known for supporting gay marriage. A lot of people are very well known for not liking me because I support gay marriage. I mean, this is something that we do as Muslim Americans all of the time.
I don't see an issue with the extreme left, because where's the extreme left in politics? They don't have traction. I mean, if you're talking about Chomsky, talking about Finkelstein, they're not involved. It's all theoretical. And a lot of people that are getting traction from that are grassroots college students, people that are in labor, people that are, code pink, you name it. They're at the margins already. Whereas, unfortunately, in government, you have that extreme right element within government itself. The Peter Kings, the Bachmans. Yeah. So I don't see the extreme left. Maybe in Europe there might be an extreme left issue there, but here in America, extreme left is very marginalized. The media, CNN had to change up their stuff because they're being accused of being liberal. So they got Glenn Beck, a couple years back. To kind of even, God knows why they did that. But the media itself is fearing being labeled as liberal, and that's not even far left yet. That's left of center. So I don't see a critical scare or or a concern of the extreme left in this country.
I detected a little bit.
Could you stand up?
I detected in some of the presentations a little bit of a sort of a Palestine cause allergy thing. That sort of it seems that you're saying that the community may have overstressed the issue of Palestine or placed it too much at the center. And I'd like you to comment a little bit more about, you know, what has been the problem with the way that the issue of Palestine has been handled of the communities or in communities, and what would be an appropriate way for Muslim Americans to deal with the question of Palestine, or should Palestinians just give up any hope that Muslims in America can do anything for them?
Well,
You represent Muslims?
yeah, thanks.
What are you going to do about Palestine, Edina?
No, the trickiest part of the Palestine question, let me say with your premise that the issue has not been overblown. It is that it for too many years served as the single issue. And I think that the maturity that Ahmed refers to is really the key way of looking at this question through the eyes of American Muslim voters. Is if we're merely going to base our vote on which of these candidates is supporting Palestinian human rights, you really have very little reason to go to the polls, because that issue within the American public sphere hasn't gained much traction, and it's fighting such an uphill battle that from my eyes, in the work that I do, that seeing American Muslims simply get stuck there, and that being the litmus test for their participation in American political life is exceedingly frustrating to me, because we are in fact shooting ourselves in the foot. And one of my mentors, and I know Ahmed's mentor also, did a great job of drilling into my head what he calls the stepladder approach to change, which is that the idea is that we can't merely show up and demand a just solution to the Palestinian human rights question and expect something to happen like that. How do you create these stages of influence? First, we have to have a presence. We have to show up, and we have to keep showing up. Do we expect change to happen just merely from our showing up? Frankly, I think that that's where most American Muslim communities are. I wrote a letter to my congressman, why didn't anything happen? I can't tell you how often I hear that. And it's, for me as an American Muslim professional, going out working with my colleagues in other communities and other civic sectors, it's frankly a little embarrassing that level of, again, that sort of lack of political maturity. But I don't blame people. Let me say that, because I think that the concerns over human rights in Palestine and other places, but Palestine epitomizes, this human rights struggle, and to see that kind of injustice be ignored by American political leaders is part of the disillusioning force that has caused many American Muslims to sit on the sidelines. So I didn't complete the stepladder approach, but the idea is that you go from presence to respect to then gaining acceptance, then gaining influence. That we have to have a politically mature way of engaging the issue so that we can see, this issue didn't get messy overnight, and it's certainly not going to get cleaned up overnight. We have to have a long-term view on this issue. And frankly, I think that if people, whether it's through student groups like SJP and others, I think that this is great water for people to get their feet wet in when it comes to political engagement, because it's one of the toughest issues, it's one of the most important issues, but it's the one that we're going to probably see the change on the slowest, and it should not stand in the way of working for change and working for positive movement on any of the other critical issues. It just merely shouldn't be the single issue.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, it goes back to my talk about what do we have as political capital. We don't have a competing voice as far as think tanks to give politicians the much needed information to counteract AIPAC and various other think tanks that are trying to push information. Because as far as they're concerned, politicians think that Palestinians are savages, that they want to wipe Israel off the map, they want to, all they do is commit terrorism. Arafat wasn't a cool guy because he wouldn't negotiate in Camp David. The narrative there, and it's in mainstream scholarship. Any scholarship that deals with the Palestinian issue is either looked at as fringe, it's not acceptable, it's not mainstream. So we don't have a think tank, we don't have publications that could push the envelope and get to the discourse of it. We don't have political capital as far as the money and the resources and the avenues to push this kind of issue into the mainstream to compete against the competing vision. So that's what we see. And the thing is, just from the polling that I've seen, the Israel-Palestine conflict isn't the main issue in voters' minds. It isn't. It's maybe for Palestinian American Muslims or Muslims that are heavily invested in there, maybe in the Levant, but not so much. Honestly, I'm not concerned about that as a political issue in the election, because it's unfortunately it's and I don't want to be offensive toward any Palestinians. It's an abstract thing to me because it's not affecting me directly right now. Getting a job, getting all these things, these are my main concerns. So I don't think that it's been pushed to the side, or if it's been it's the main issue. And I agree with Edina. It's for a while that was the one issue that people were looking at, and it hurt them badly pragmatically in the elections.
Yeah, I appreciate your sensitivity, and that's probably much of that is probably my fault as usual. There are kind of three areas on the Palestinian question. Number one is the premise that American Muslims always speak to the Palestinian issue as Americans. And that's something that we learned a long time ago. And when I wrote a book that was edited by Edina when I was 20, 21, we referred to Israel as an apartheid state. We did. And it didn't do great wonders for my career. But at that time, that was my opinion. And, so the first issue is to speak to the Palestinian question as Americans. And part of the trajectory of growth in identity is very complex. So we had an imported imam issue as American Muslims for the last 30 years. Nobody is qualified to lead the prayer. Nobody's qualified to talk. Nobody knows Arabic. So what do? We go get imams from other countries. Well, homie comes from Alexandria, Egypt, and guess what he does? He gets up in a mosque in LA and starts screaming, "Il Yahud, Il Yahud," the Jews, the Jews. Wait a minute, bro. We don't talk like that. We don't talk like that. We don't think like that. We don't approach the Israeli-Palestinian conflict like that. So part of it is the maturity of the leadership of American Muslims in being able to engage that question as a component of American public life. Two more things. We also don't have the white privilege that allows you to engage these topics without being called a terrorist or a supporter of Hamas or an anti-Semite. And this is a reality that American Muslims, we don't talk about this as American Muslims. We probably do, and Jackson does, and Geraldes does, but most American Muslims don't talk about white privilege. We don't have, in America, the privilege to be able to get up on TV and go head-to-head on the Palestinian-Israeli question and be equals. And only be focused on the substantive outcome of the conversation. It also has to do with the environment accepting our contribution to some extent. And then finally, the Palestinian question is like crack. If you look at Gallup data, pretend like this is the West Bank or this is Gaza. As you go further away from Palestine, it increases in importance as an issue for the people that you are polling. And as you go closer to Palestine, it decreases as an issue that people care about as you are polling. That's something I didn't know as an American Muslim growing up. Like, I've just come from living 3 years in the Arab Gulf as the advisor of a queen, and we were running a job creation project. But I can assure you that the American Muslim community is very illiterate on the Palestinian issue. We're illiterate on Iran. We're illiterate on the Gulf countries. We're illiterate on the funding of and arming of Al-Qaeda affiliated rebel warriors that then turned them into attempts at Khilafah. We as American Muslims are illiterate on the Arab world. We do not understand Arab world politics. We do not understand the Gulf countries. We do not understand North Africa. We do not understand Africa. We do not understand these key strategic issues that are happening, and we just don't understand. And that's why half of us are for arming the Syrian rebels and half of us are against arming the Syrian rebels. And half of us were for the war in Afghanistan, half of us were against the war in Afghanistan. And so part of the Palestinian question specifically goes back to the literacy of American Muslims. we as a community do not have that many people among us that know the Arab world as an insider and can inform an American Muslim opinion on what's happening in the Arab world, where an American Muslim contribution can be authentically American and can be unique to the solutions that are required on the ground. We lack that literacy.
How did you get that literacy?
So how do you get...
How would you get that literacy thing?
Yeah, well, you know, how do you get that literacy? Through a lot of things. Through exchange programs, through some of us going over there and working like I did and understanding what's happening, through the development of intellectual capacity. You know, I'm not somebody that's for Muslim think tanks and Muslim YMCAs, and I don't think we need any of that. I think we should just go out into America and be a part of what's happening in America, and we'll be just fine, and we're going to do just fine. So, you know, building a parallel ghetto identity is not something that I support. But yeah, that will remedy itself like anything else remedies itself. I mean, what do American Muslims know about Burma and what's happening to the Muslims in Burma and why Aung San Suu Kyi is not fighting for the Muslims of Burma? What do we know about that? There are a lot of memes on my Facebook page about Burma, pray for the people in Burma, give to... But what is it that's happening in Burma? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. What happened in Bahrain? Who's supporting who in Bahrain? Are we as American Muslims pro-Shia identities being a part of the Arab Gulf? Or are we not pro-Shia identity? I don't know. I mean, I still see in the American Muslim community young Muslim Sunnis that don't want to pray behind young Muslim Shias. Let alone for us to develop the knowledge requisite to be able to inform. Look, I'm somebody that is from Egypt. I work in Egypt all of the time. I have a TV show coming up in Egypt. I have refused to go to Egypt since the revolution. I am from LA. If there's a revolution in LA, I'll be the keynote speaker. The revolution in Egypt, that's for Egyptians that live in Egypt, that suffer under an Egyptian regime, that know what is best for their society and for their country. My job, technical assistance. My job, job creation. My job, best practices to make sure that we're fixing critical sectors in each economy. But for me to go play revolutionary and roll on to Tahrir Square in my Bob Marley t-shirt and talk about revolution, no. I'm an American Muslim. My beef is here. Even if a component of that beef is making sure that there's justice for Palestinians.
Yes, I
have a quick question of you.
Please speak up. Thank you.
You know, you were talking about how do we know what the Arabs are feeling and stuff. My perception is all these imams that are imported from over there are for that reason, is for us Muslims in America to become sensitive to the Arab issues. It seems to me like that is a movement within the mosque-going population. Is that correct?
Yeah, but when we had the imported imam issue, we didn't have an American Muslim identity, right? So this is the first era where we have an imported imam issue where we have an American Muslim identity. So the imam comes from abroad. Like when Ghada was 10, the imam would come from abroad, and there was not, like, there's no, okay, now the imam comes from abroad, and they figure out, uh-oh, these kids talk this way. You get to them this way. Their culture is this way. And you see now in the mosques, the imam is the outsider. I see it in the mosque all the time. The imam is he's the weirdo. He's the one that nobody knows what's going on. What's up with this guy? He's like nobody. Now, they're going to kill me. Okay, one more thing. The flip side of the imported imam problem is what? All American Muslims are imams. So now you get to a situation where when you sit with any young Muslim that is attempting to engage the public square, what are they reading? They're reading Ibn Ashur on the Maqasid of Sharia. What are they reading? They're reading Al-Ghazali's philosophy of, I don't know. You're like, bro, what are you reading, bro? Like, I don't understand. Are you becoming a scholar? No, I'm not becoming a scholar. Then why are you reading this? Because I want to be like Hamza Yusuf. Because I want to be like Suhaib Way. Because I want to be like whoever. And so the sexiness of Islam today has become for everyone to become oriented in religious study and amplify a religious Muslim identity. Whereas that wasn't the case back, without being embarrassing. Like, her father is, like Dr. Osman's father, is the or one of the founding fathers of American Muslim identity. He took the Quran and he said, look, here it is by topic in English. Look for any topic, you'll find the Quran related to that topic, and you'll find some explanation that is sourced in an American Muslim paradigm, so that you can understand what's going on, so that you can move forward. That does not exist today. That does not exist today. We have young American Muslims that want to wear robes and play Arab, or we got people at the club. And our ability to find something in the middle hasn't happened. It hasn't happened.
I generally agree. Exactly, it's my job to push back. We're good friends. But I think that there are pockets of hope. I mean, in my travels around the country, I mean, it's we certainly. Let me say that I get professionally depressed far more often than I would like to admit, because of the amount of challenges that we're facing all at once. I mean, in dealing with Muslim-Jewish issues, and as was mentioned in my bio, I'm the chair of a Muslim-Jewish dialogue program for young professionals. In engaging with my Jewish colleagues and closest friends, one of the things I say the most often is I'm so jealous, because you have the ability to focus on one or two issues. You have the ability to place your energy, in a compared to the Muslim community, the Jewish community is homogenous. I mean, compared, like that's a vast overgeneralization, but the issues and the challenges that we're dealing with are completely different. Like I mentioned, I grew up here in San Diego, at the Islamic Center of San Diego. When I was growing up, when I was a teenager, the khutbahs, the Friday sermons, were in Arabic. Clearly, I'm not somebody who speaks Arabic. For me, as a young person, and my parents growing up under a system that didn't acknowledge or allow their religion to be practiced, we didn't have religious literacy in our home. So when I would go to the mosque, I wasn't being offered religious literacy from the pulpit. I wasn't learning about Islam from the pulpit, because that was coming to be in Arabic, and then it was followed by, my parents will keep me honest, by like a 10-minute translation of the gist of whatever the khutbah was. So I wasn't even getting the full translation. It was the gist. I was being shortchanged. And I think that, frankly, that's the challenge that a lot of young American Muslims speak to. And the reality today is that 40% of the American Muslim population is under the age of 30. 40% of this community is under the age of 30. What gives me hope is the idea that in 10 years or 20 years, in the next 3 to 5 years, in the next 3 to 5 elections, they become the critical mass within our community. That we have more and more domestic-born, less entangled in questions of identity, less entangled in the sense of, am I American? Am I Montenegrin? Am I both? Am I Muslim? How do these things fit together? Do I have to choose? And then do I have to find a candidate that fits all of those things? I mean, the complexities are, I think, overwhelming. And to this question of, the foreign-born imams, they're going to still keep coming, but what gives me hope is that there are more and more domestic-born imams. That there are now places, like even here in Southern California, the Claremont Bayan, it's the Claremont Graduate Seminary, am I saying it right? That before was a seminary for Christian clergy to come through, and is now the first multi-faith seminary in the country. They are training imams and rabbis and pastors and other variants alongside each other within the same program, not parallel programs.
Wow.
That's the face of the future, and it's these kinds of innovative, forward-thinking, barrier-breaking efforts that are out there that will determine the future that we live in. And those are the efforts that I, in my professional moments of depression, that I find the most inspiration for, is that it's happening. I have the same itch about it's not happening fast enough.
And also, just to add more, and we'll get to, I guess, the questions. Look at also for a convert. If she's talking about, being disconnected at an early age, and she's, born and raised a Muslim. Imagine a convert going through a mosque that only speaks Arabic. But yeah, I agree with Edina. There's a bit of a shift, and what I'm seeing from the youth is they're gravitating toward the Hamza Yusufs, to the Suhaib Webbs, to the Sherman Jacksons. Not so much that they're charismatic, although that it's a big part of it, but because they're speaking to issues that affect them here in this country. That they're being relevant, and these foreign-born imams are not being relevant. One of my former interns complained to me and said, I'm not going to name the mosque that he complained about. He said that this is the 5th time that the imam was talking about the marriage khutbah, the marriage sermon about getting married. I could have sworn I heard that 2 weeks ago. I mean, so it's recycled sermons that are not speaking to the issues of the community from these foreign-born imams that are pushing the youth away and going toward the more indigenous scholars of imams like Sherman Jackson, Sohaib Webb, Hamza Youssef, Imam Zaid Shakir, etc. So they're going because of the issues of what's going on in this country, issues that pertain to them as young Muslims, and they're by far the majority in this country. So I see that as a, but of course that's going very slow. I don't see, there's still, the people that are in charge of these mosques are still have that old mindset that, we need, because as Sherman Jackson said, there's no authenticity of American Islam yet, that we are not producing the scholars of the same caliber as the scholars overseas. Therefore, we need to get scholars overseas to be our imams, not American Muslims yet. So there's a problem of authenticity and of credibility within the community, but it's slowly changing.
Yes, Edina.
The event of 9/11 has come about throughout the discussion, and my question here is more towards media. I think that, post 9/11, the media did unjust presentation of the Arabic Muslim body, but I would like to hear, as your opinion, what the media lacks in, or I guess it'd be really long with this, but what can the media do to improve? I mean, if you have all the networks, at your disposal, and they ask you, what can we better do to improve the American Muslim representation of both New York and Europe?
I know. Yeah. Well. Okay. Yeah. I wore a media hat for many years. I think that the main problem post 9/11 was the one that we created for ourselves as American Muslims, which is that we hadn't laid the groundwork for having relationships within the media. And you don't build relationships in moments of crisis, right? That's sort of disaster planning 101. You need to have those relationships in place. So there was, for those first few years, there was this sort of crisis of who speaks for who and what's the leadership of this community. And the average journalist learning curve, is pretty steep on a daily basis, because more and more as the media climate is changing, newsrooms are shrinking, and that means you don't have experts. You have generalists who are being, and particularly on the local level. There are general assignment reporters, so one day they're covering something in the court, the next day they get sent to, eat prayers in the community, go write a religion story. And so that, I think that factor, I think we expect too much sometimes from journalists in terms of what they know. And I say this as somebody who has a journalism background, because again, their priorities are shifting, and that 24-hour news cycle is changing things quickly. That's point number one. Point number two is that I think that what has needed to happen, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster, I would say, over the years, is this notion of getting authentic American Muslim voices and faces out there speaking for themselves on the airwaves. One of the greatest shortcomings, I think, in the last decade has been that more often than not, when you turn on the TV and somebody's talking about Islam or Muslims, they're not Muslim or know anything about Islam. In fact, MPAC just released a special report looking at the top 25 quote-unquote experts on Islam who are being cited by public officials and doing training for law enforcement and making it out there on the media airwaves. And all but one of them lack any sort of educational qualifications to call themselves, an expert on Islam. But they have this, this huge wave that they ride. You can call yourself a counterterrorism expert and get pretty far pretty fast. In more recent years, I would say that in the first 5 years after 9/11, you actually saw more Muslim faces on the news than you do today. I'm not 100% sure why that is, frankly, but my sense is that that there is a shift that's taking place within the media climate from looking for people who are advocates. So Muslims blew something up. We need a Muslim to comment on it, explain to us why Muslims would do this. And for many years, when people would say, I saw you on TV recently, I would duck my head, because I laugh and say, well, that just means that something bad happened. I mean, frankly, that's the only time that you would see a Muslim face on TV, is if something bad happened, and we were there to react to it. The challenge that we face now is how we, as Muslims ourselves, start entering these industries more and more, telling our own stories, and becoming cultural producers. This is starting to happen. Again, we're not starting from zero, but Muslim musicians and artists and journalists and writers and this cultural production, because this is where the normalization takes place. Think about Richard Pryor. Think about. I was about to drive George Lopez on the mind. I went to an event last week where Cheech Manin gave an award to George Lopez, and this idea of these firsts that are out there and who are showing a different face of Islam. You know, we need folks like the formerly known as Mos Def, now back to Yassine, and others who are out there who are just saying I'm Muslim, so what? That, like Ahmed said, that's sort of part of my identity. That's not my defining thing. The greatest advancement to me in terms of media portrayals is if we had a character on Glee that happened to be Muslim, or on Grey's Anatomy that happened to be Muslim doctors. 1 out of every 25 doctors in this country are Muslim. There should certainly be a Muslim quote unquote doctor on these medical shows.
They're not playing a terrorist.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's that religion kind of being more in the background. So that's a little bit of both on the Hollywood and on the news side. But I'm more troubled that there aren't more Muslim faces that are on the news helping make sense of what is going on these days, and that what I do see is that there's a shift, which I think is good. There's a shift from moving away from having advocates on to having analysts on, which I think is totally legit. I mean, my place as an advocate going on national news, I'm seen as being biased, right? I've got a horse in the game. Versus, Ahmed is the author of a book, or Reza Aslan, or any number of people that are out there operate as independent contractors, and therefore, have a different sort of credibility that works in media, media language.
Just one comment about moving more toward the culture with regards to having musicians, but there has been pushback, and all of you remember the All-American Muslim, right? When we were trying to present a normalized Muslim community in Dearborn, primarily the Shia community, and look what happened. So much pressure was laid upon them. So we're getting there, but there is a lot of pushback from the far right in regards to, because they don't want to see a normalized look of Islam or Muslim community. They want to see the caricature.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you expand a little on what happened with that? Because I don't know that everybody's.
Well, All-American Muslim was a TLC program that kind of similar to the other so-called reality shows where you have, and what was it, the Real Housewives of whatever, New Jersey, Orange County. Don't ask me why I know that. My wife watches that stuff, so you have the All-American Muslim, which is supposed to portray everyday Muslims doing everyday things. Most of it kind of boring. And what happened was there was a pushback from the far right regarding they're not showing the part where they're planning the next explosion or terrorist attack. And so much pressure was laid to bear that they started a campaign to attack their corporate sponsors that sponsor television shows. The reason why they're on is because sponsors are willing to put up the money. So their first target was Lowe's. Anybody shop at Lowe's?
Yeah, sure.
I go to Home Depot, so Lowe's. Lowe's was pressured by these advocates from the far right to discontinue funding this show, and so they bared the pressure and they fell over, and others as well, to the point where TLC determined that this show is not profitable. There's too much pushback from big segments of the community. Therefore, we're pulling it back, and it's very unfortunate because they had a portrait of a Muslim high school coach that had a primarily Muslim, like the majority of them were Muslim, from Fordson High School. You had a person that wanted to open a nightclub. That's how diverse the community is. I saw a tatted Muslim over there. Just crazy stuff. But that's a real representation of a segment of our community. And unfortunately, we've been stuck with the caricatures.
So what happened? What happened in the community?
Well, the community now, the storm, like throwing fatwas at each other. The people want to boycott it because they're not really Muslim, they're not practicing, or that guy has an earring. So you have that.
You see what's happening? The challenge is our challenge in the public square is they didn't accept the show. The right wing wouldn't. But look at the American Muslim community. the American Muslim community had large contingents that didn't accept the show. Why? Because the kids weren't conservative enough. Because one girl was going to homecoming, and one girl had a boyfriend, I think, and somebody got caught with a beer. And they were like, no, these are American Muslims. How dare you show them drinking beer? That's not representative. And I thought you're right, it's not. Most American Muslims smoke weed. They don't drink alcohol. I'm just kidding. But do you see what I'm saying? Like this is a very important part of our narrative. It's a very important part of what I'm like pushing for my own idea here. This maturation idea, right? There can be a TLC show. But if every TLC show is going to have a bunch of organized, conservative, in the mosque American Muslim, and I'm a practicing American Muslim, I lead Friday sermon, I do all those things. But if every attempt is going to have that on the other end, well then, I mean, is it really worth it? I mean, is it really worth it? And the other problem becomes, our community is very good because of a certain group of organizations that exist within it, very good at having awareness of hate. Like, dude, if somebody calls Muslims a cockroach, I will find out about it within 15 seconds. From a press release, from CARE, or from somebody else. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is that we become hypersensitized to hate. Once you are sick and tired of being hypersensitized to hate, what does everybody say to each other? We got to do something. We need action. So what becomes the action? To counter the hate. Now, when the loudest voice in our community is primarily occupied with countering hate, what's going to happen to the whole community? The whole community that's following them is going to only be, the muscle reflex is to attack hate. The muscle reflex is not proactive engagement. The muscle reflex is not programming. The muscle reflex is to attack the hate, to respond to the hate. So then we become a whole community that's responding to less than 1% of the outside world.
We feel that that's representative of far more than 1%.
Right? And so the problem becomes, we ourselves as American Muslims, we're swayed from the things I meant. We're swayed from education, we're swayed from healthcare, we're swayed from fixing the prison system in this country, ending a war on drugs that makes absolutely no sense. We're swayed from being intellectual leaders in the fight between faith and reason. In the fight between religious conservatism and a woman's right to protect her own body the way she sees fit. I mean, I heard a little smirk when she said public intellectual. That's part of where we need to grow as American Muslims. For there to be people that put themselves out there and say, no, this is the idea. Attack me for this idea. That's okay. We don't have that. We have academics, but we don't have that as a community. And so a lot of this is about the growth and maturation of the Muslims of America in their identity as Muslims, which is where Dr. Osman's father and his work comes in, or in their identity as Americans, which is also where that comes in, and where the rest of us come in, having lived this experience.
Sandra, last question.
Oh my God, this is the last question. I always have very specific questions, so
That's all right.
I apologize
Just
in
if you
advance for
speak
that.
up.
I actually have a huge question, and I have some small detailed questions, so I'll go for the small detailed ones. 40%, somebody gave this figure, 40% of the American Muslim population is under 30, and the American Muslim population is, I believe it was Ahmed Younis who said, wealthy in general. I don't know what the percentage is of that. It sounds, you guys sort of, this picture of the American community, American Muslim population is somewhat confusing, but can I ask, at what point do you think there might be, if we have a growing percentage of young American Muslims, a sort of engagement with new kinds of issues such as gay Muslims, this kind of thing? Is that going to happen in the United States?
It is happening. Well, see, that's the thing. I mean, is that in the range of negativity, right? Where I think we all have some professional negativity sometimes, but in the negativity that that we feel that sometimes I feel sometimes dominates the mosqued part of the community. There are all of these organic efforts that exist all around the country that are ignored in these conversations. There are gay Muslim groups out there. They're not being accepted by the mainstream, religious communities. But the difference is, and I think that this is the hugely American trait, is they don't care. They're not looking to be a member of the Islamic Society of North America. And I think that this speaks to how people are organizing these days, and that the notions and definitions of community are changing. And more and more young people that who are interested in politics and the economy and education and these which they are religious issues, right? They get to the core of our faith values, but they don't look at them as having a place or having that conversation within the mosque. What are they going to do? They leave the mosque. Well, my concern is that in 20 years that we're going to have a bunch of empty buildings, frankly, because if the mosques aren't,
Mosques change.
if this is the thing is that we're in this moment of adapt or die. That we have, particularly for the immigrant portion of the community, which is 2/3 of the community, that that founded a lot of the mosques that are all across the country. They're stuck in founder syndrome. Those guys, and they are almost all guys, are the ones who started the mosques and are still running them in most cases. They're revolving door of the board members, and that's good because it's allowed for stability and and continuity. And yet, if there isn't a succession of leadership that's planned out and where younger leaders are cultivated to take ownership, rightful ownership, not symbolic ownership of, let me give you a board seat, come sit and listen to what the adults are saying, kind of thing, then we're not going to have real change. But again, there are these pockets that are out there where you have not only mosques, but you have community groups or just groups that are starting up in the tradition of social entrepreneurship, where people aren't waiting for permission; they're starting their own. You have groups. There's a group in Chicago that's called the Inner City Muslim Action Network that works on prison reentry programs, has a clinic, has monthly culture and arts shows. There's another group in Chicago that's called Project M that focuses on running Muslim candidates for a local office. I mean, they're not waiting for MPAC or CARE or ISNA or any of these the old guard leadership to do that. And I think that that's where the change is going to happen, because they don't need to wait for permission. There's the classic saying, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness later if you need to. It's that kind of thing. If you don't like it, that's okay. I don't need your permission. And that's where the roots of the the roots of the future that these under 30 now, the future that they live in is going to be completely different. My screaming or sleeping son out there somewhere is his vision of Islam and his lived reality of Islam will be different. I don't know how, but it will be different. I mean, the fact that he can just touch my, already at 15 months already touches the screen and expects it to move. His notion of what Islam is fundamentally different than mine or my parents, and that's the most hopeful news I have.
And I would also say that the goal is not to liberalize opinion, and the goal is not to liberalize identity. And the kind of, when we were all in school and Samuel Huntington was kind of raging, I mean, we are no longer so simple in our paradigm that we believe in a modernizing of Muslim identity or reforming of Muslim identity. No. We want people to choose a conservative lifestyle if they choose a conservative lifestyle, and to choose a liberal lifestyle if they choose a liberal lifestyle. But there are people here that were at a gathering that I was at a couple weeks ago where I suggested no more building of mosques. I was almost lynched. Simply because I said, wow, what's with the mosques? How about a few homeless shelters, and how about some free clinics for people, and how about a job creation center, and and we can just pray in the back. What's with the mosque? But I'm okay with conservative. I mean, I am conservative in many ways, but I am liberal in many ways. But my intent is not to push the community anywhere. My intent is for whatever is articulated from an American Muslim sounds, feels, and is authentically American and intentionally Muslim. That's all I care. Other than that, you can be whoever you want. And the parallel development at the community level is also very problematic. I mean, Muslim religious identity in America now, you're either a mystic or you're a Salafi that's following the Saudis. I mean, like the rest of us are just kind of sitting here thinking, what about those of us that fast and pray 5 times a day and love the Prophet? You're either a mystic, you're a Sufi, you're somebody that has some sort of like mysticism, or you're somebody that's following the literalism of the most conservative of the Saudis. Even the space in the middle needs to be filled by leaders that are willing to push back against those two extreme nodes. And there are elements of that. There are a lot of Azhari graduates that are a part of that. There are elements of that in the American Muslim community.
All right, well, please join me in thanking the 3 panelists for their thoughtfulness, their eloquence,